Hi, my name is Andrew McDermott, and this is the Champions Mindset Podcast. Join me as I dive into the minds of the world's greatest champions and share with you the secrets, lessons, and knowledge that's allowed them to rise to the top. Welcome to our community of greatness, abundance, and fortitude. Thank you so much for being here. It's time to become the person you've always wanted to be. It is October 24th. And this is the second edition of the Champions Mindset Podcast weekly show. Thank you for those who are tuning in to the second week, and I hope the first week didn't go too poorly. So this week, I'm introducing our first new segment, and that is what I'm reading. And I just wanted to talk about the current books I'm reading and what's going on and stuff I think is pretty cool. So I picked up a new book that just came out called The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World. And it's by a neuroscientist, Adam Gazzaley, and Larry D. Rosen, who is a psychologist. This has been something that is a big area that I've needed to work on myself. And that's why when I saw this book, I was like, this is perfect. Especially when you're running your own business, when you have a million things going on, you're always checking your email. You have a million different notifications coming at you from all your different social media feeds. It's just really hard to tune everything out. It's hard to just focus on one thing without being interrupted. So this book was really something that I bought instantly when I saw it. So just to give you a little gist of what it's about, is the basic concept is talking about how technology interferes with our focus and something called goal interference. Because every time we're working on something, every time we are at work, we have a goal. We want to make progress. We want to achieve something. And goal interference are things that slow down us from achieving our goals. And they come in two forms in this book: interruptions and distractions. And so from the book, this is what they say distractions are. Distractions are pieces of goal-irrelevant information that we either encounter in our external surroundings or generate internally within our own minds. When it comes to distractions, our intentions are very clear. We wish to ignore them, shut them out, suppress them, and carry on with attempting to accomplish our singular goal. So that's one way that our goals can be interfered with, right? Is being distracted by something either externally or internally. And then there are interruptions, which is the difference from distractions, because interruptions happen when you make a decision to concurrently engage in more than one task at the same time. And even if you attempt to switch rapidly between them, just like distractions, interruptions may be generated internally or externally. So these are the two things that can slow us down from achieving our goals, and being able to master both distractions and interruptions is how we can become more focused, have a higher rate of attention, and sustain that attention for longer times. And they say that decades of research have now shown that while focusing on relevant information is, of course, critical to accomplishing our goals, ignoring irrelevant information is just as important. And that was a very eye-opening section of the book for me, because when you think about productivity, you always think about what you can do, what you need to do more of. What I hadn't thought about, I had always thought about productivity, attention as a plus thing, what I can do more of, but never on the other side of the spectrum as a minus, from the minus aspect, what you can take away. So they gave an example. If you sit at a coffee shop and try to focus on a conversation with a friend, you indeed may be aware of the goal interference all around you, and thus consciously attempt to ignore the chatter and cafe music. In either case, suppression of irrelevant information in your brain is not a passive process, but an active one that generates contrast between neural patterns, and thus finally sculpts how we experience the world based on our goals. So we need to put ourselves in a situation to minimize these interruptions and distractions. Even if we think we can have the willpower to ignore them, they're still subconsciously affecting your attention. So the fact that ignoring is an active process is critical to understanding the distracted mind because it emphasizes that it takes resources to filter out what is irrelevant. Because you only have so much mental energy. And if you're always battling, you're not going to be as productive. You're not going to have as much attention if you're trying to focus on what is important, but also at the same time giving this mental energy towards blocking something out. And what they also say in the book is that it's not necessarily true that when you focus more on something, you automatically ignore everything else. And that's a fallacy that they deconstruct in the book, that just because we may feel locked into something, if we're in this situation where interruptions and distractions can affect us, then we're not going to be performing at as high a level as we can be. So that's kind of the basis of the distracted mind. They really dig into the biological aspect of how we've developed as humans over time. And they talk about what's actually going on in your brain through hundreds of thousands of years of development. It's really incredible because it gives you more of an understanding of how new everything is around us, and how I never realized how much is actually distracting me and how much more I could be doing. And at the end of the book, they give you different ways that you can limit these distractions, but not delete your Twitter, delete your Facebook, not use a cell phone. Really practical applications. It's awesome. Once again, that's The Distracted Mind by Adam Gazzaley and Larry D. Rosen. I definitely recommend it. So on to topic one of today, and that is probably the biggest story in the sports world. Even if you're not a baseball fan, I'm sure you've heard about the Cubs advancing to the World Series. Their first World Series in 71 years, and they have not won in 108. They posted 103-58 record this year, which was the best in baseball, and that's the most games the Cubs have won in one season since 1910. So they won last week on October 22nd, 2016. And that date's significant because 5 years ago, half a decade, on October 22nd, 2001, they hired their GM, Theo Epstein. And Theo Epstein is a fascinating guy. He is really a baseball savant, a genius. And to talk about Theo, you got to go back to where he started. And he was actually hired as the youngest general manager in baseball at age 28 by the Boston Red Sox in 2002. 28 years old, and he's in charge of one of the world's most iconic franchises. And so Epstein is credited with initiating the trade of Nomar Garciaparra and making key contract acquisitions during his first tenure as the Red Sox GM. He built a new era for the Boston Red Sox when, at the time, we're still under the so-called curse of the Great Bambino, which was the curse that when the Red Sox traded away Babe Ruth, that they never had won a World Series again until 2004, when the Red Sox beat the St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series. It was their first World Series championship since 1918, ending what remained the third longest drought in history of any major league team, which is now left to the Chicago Cubs. So he had done what almost a century's worth of other general managers could not do, and that was bring a championship to Boston, and he was only 28 years old. But here's where it gets interesting with the guy. And on October 31st, 2005, a year after they had won that World Series, he resigned. He rejected a $1.5 million per year contract, which would have been the biggest in baseball, for personal reasons. According to the Boston Globe, at his press conference, Theo said, "This is a job you have to give your whole heart and soul to. In the end, after a long period of reflection about myself and the program, I decided I could no longer put my whole heart and soul into it." Now, I'm not a Red Sox fan, but I'm sure at this time it would be easy to jump to attack the guy, to not understand why. And I don't think he's ever really come out and talked about what was going on to make that decision. But I respect him for having the courage to do that, because he could have taken that money and whatever was going on in his life at the time affecting his job, and he would not have been performing at 100%. And to have the courage to realize that and to put that whole organization before himself, before the money, is really an admirable thing. So after that, Theo was away from baseball for 5-6 years. No one really knew if he was ever. I think he did some consulting with the Red Sox, but nothing to the same degree as being a GM. So in 2011, he then came back to baseball. He made his return by being the new GM of the Chicago Cubs. He had already destroyed one curse, and this was really the biggest job that he could do then. It was really the last frontier for him. For a guy like Theo, who is, like I said, he's a baseball savant, genius, this is the biggest task he could possibly take on. And the first thing he did when he arrived as the new GM of the Chicago Cubs was he brought an expectation of success and winning. He completely changed who the Cubs were. He said, "We're going to build this around young players. Free agency should never be the primary area you rely upon to build your club. If you set out to build a foundation based on free agency, you have a tough road ahead of you." Going back and watching some of his press conferences when he first got to the Cubs really reminded me of when Barry Alvarez came to the Wisconsin Badgers as the head football coach. Before Barry Alvarez got to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the Badgers hadn't finished higher than third in the Big Ten in almost 3 decades. They were one of the worst programs in college football. But Barry Alvarez, who came from being a defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, sat down and told the world, "You better buy your season tickets now, because before long they'll be sold out." And everyone's kind of saying, what's this guy talking about? He's coming to this dumpster program, and he hadn't even coached a game yet for him, and he's saying, "You better buy your season tickets." I once heard a story that he told the freshmen on that first team who went 1-10 that by the time they were seniors, they would win the Rose Bowl. Well, within 4 years, the Badgers won the Big Ten and also won that Rose Bowl. And ever since Barry Alvarez, who is now the athletic director of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, has had an incredibly historical run of success. And it all started with him bringing that expectation of success. And that's what Theo Epstein did with the Cubs. That's what he did with the Cubs, who went from 101 losses in 2012 to 103 victories this season. And it all started with Theo Epstein, who engineered that overhaul and turned over 100% of that roster from his arrival. So by next week's episode, we'll have a little more on the Cubs' historic run and see if they can finish the job. So on to our next topic, which is the Los Angeles Sparks, who won the WNBA Championship and their 3rd championship in franchise history. It was an amazing championship game where the Sparks beat the Minnesota Lynx by just 1 point. The WNBA made a really interesting change this year in their playoff format. Instead of the traditional 2-conference system where a winner comes out of each conference to compete for the title, what the WNBA did was, now that the top 8 teams who made the playoffs just played each other based on record in a seeded system. So the whole purpose of that was to get the 2 best teams regardless of conference. And it worked out perfectly in the first year because the Sparks and Lynx were the 2 best teams all year with the 2 best records. So instead of meeting in the semifinals, they met for the championship. It was a great matchup, a great series that literally went down to the final seconds. For me, it was awesome seeing forward Candace Parker finally win a title. Growing up, she was one of my favorite basketball players when she was at the University of Tennessee and played for the late and legendary Pat Summitt. Her teams were so fun to watch. She was unbelievable. She's one of the best college basketball players ever, one of the best WNBA players ever. But so Candace Parker, she came out as the number 1 pick in 2008 and won the Rookie of the Year. She's now a 2-time MVP and has just a laundry list of achievements. But up until now, she had never won a title. Before the series started, Candace Parker said, "My rookie season, I thought I would be in this situation at least 4 or 5 times by now." So it was awesome seeing her finally win this title, a player of her caliber. It was like when LeBron finally won his title, Elway winning 2 at the end of his career, because you know how unbelievable these players are. They're legends. They're the best in the game. You know they're championship deserving talents, but it just doesn't always work out that way. Look at the Barry Sanders of the world. So a huge congratulations to the Los Angeles Sparks, and also to their head coach, Brian Agler, who is an alumni of Wittenberg University. On episode 8, we had one of my mentors and close friends, Gary Williams, who is the athletic director of Wittenberg. So a little Tiger pride there. On to the last topic of the day, which also involves the Chicago Cubs and maybe their number one fan, who is Bill Murray. Bill Murray is a diehard Cubs fan, and he also just won the Mark Twain Prize, which is one of the highest honors in comedy. It was funny, and he wasn't joking. He actually said that if the Cubs, the NLCS series went longer, he would not have been able to attend the ceremony because he was not going to miss that game. It was an awesome ceremony. Legendary comedians all paid tribute to him. Steve Martin, Jimmy Kimmel, David Letterman. And it was interesting because just like we talked about last week with Bob Dylan, who still has not accepted the Nobel Prize for Literature, Bill Murray was very reluctant to accept this prize. He said, "As much as I've dreaded this, I really have come back to this idea that there was love." And what this goes to show to me is that it was never about the fame, the prizes, the money. For this guy, he just loved comedy, loved making people laugh. And that was always a really cool thing I always thought about Bill Murray's comedy. I remember the first time I'd ever seen any of his work was Caddyshack, which is one of the funniest movies ever. And he's just unbelievable in it because his comedy just, it makes you happy. You know, there's all different types of comedy and they're all great, but his was always, you always came out feeling better. There was no hostility behind it. And it was really unique in the way he made you laugh. You know, he's in a ton of blockbuster movies and his career spanned 4 decades now. In an emotional salute to his older brother at the ceremony, Brian Doyle Murray, he thanked him for his trust when the younger actor was an unknown kid, Little Murray, at Second City, which is one of the most legendary improv groups now in Chicago that a lot of the people who are on SNL, Saturday Night Live, also came from there. Bill Murray said, "The only reason I'm here is because of the guts of my older brother, Brian." He's been waiting a long time to hear that. So he was thanking his brother for giving him that chance at Second City to push him, to make him do that. Bill Murray dropped out of college to go to Second City and start his comedy career. And that just goes to show how important support is from our loved ones and how much it means to us. And I thought that was really cool. So now let's get to the quote of the week, which comes from one of my favorite philosophers. I've been reading a lot of his work lately, Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, who said, "True wisdom comes to each of us when we realize how little we understand about life, ourselves, and the world around us." I love this quote. I have it on a little sheet of paper on my desk, and I want you to think about that this week. Because a lot of the times we're very quick to jump to a judgment, to think we know something, because when we don't, it attacks our ego, and we want to think that we know everything a lot of the times. And to have this open mind that we know so little is really the only way that you one day know so much, because you're always learning, because you always have this open mind to looking at things from a different perspective, to changing your perspectives, which is just as important. So that's this week's quote of the week to live by. Thank you for listening to the second edition of the weekly show. Don't forget to subscribe to the Champions Mindset podcast on iTunes. Hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to the podcast page on iTunes and leave a 5-star review. These reviews really help with the show getting noticed and help us spread our message. You can also sign up to our newsletter on the website, www.firstfinisher.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram to receive all the latest updates from the show and join the community of other Champions Mindset podcast listeners. That's it for today. I will see you next week.